Let me start by telling you something most people don't realize until they're emotionally exhausted. Not every question is asked to understand you. Some questions are asked to control you. And the dangerous part is this. They don't sound aggressive. They don't sound cruel. They often sound reasonable, even caring. But the moment you hear them, something in your body shifts. Your chest tightens. Your mind rushes. Your words suddenly feel harder to find. And before you even know why, you feel guilty, or defensive, or confused. Have you ever been asked a question that made you feel like you had already done something wrong, even though you hadn't? Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "Why do I feel so small right now? Why do I feel like I owe an explanation? Why do I feel drained just from answering a question?" Here's what most people never tell you. Some questions are not invitations to connect. They are quiet strategies to push your nervous system into submission. And if you've ever been someone who explains too much, apologizes too fast, or doubts yourself after conversations like these, this video is for you. Because today we're going to uncover what really exists behind manipulative questions, how they affect your brain, your emotions, and your sense of self, and most importantly, how to respond without becoming cold, rude, or defensive. So stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll understand why certain questions leave you feeling trapped, why your body reacts before your mind does, and how to stop stepping into emotional traps disguised as just a question. If you want deeper emotional clarity, stronger boundaries, and communication that protects your peace, subscribe to Emotional Growth. Now let's begin. Slowly, clearly, and honestly. To understand why manipulative questions affect you so deeply, we need to talk about something very simple and very human. Your brain is wired to respond to questions. The moment someone asks you something, your nervous system goes on alert. Not because you're insecure, not because you're weak, but because questions signal evaluation. Your mind instantly starts scanning for safety. What do they want from me? Is there a right answer? What happens if I answer wrong? Am I about to be judged? And here's the key point most people miss. Your body reacts before your mind finishes thinking. When a question carries even a subtle sense of threat, your limbic system picks it up immediately. Your heart rate shifts. Your breathing changes. Stress hormones like cortisol are released. And when cortisol rises, the part of your brain responsible for clear thinking, language, and perspective becomes less active. That's why, in certain conversations, you suddenly struggle to explain yourself. That's why your words come out messy or incomplete. That's why you think of the perfect answer only later, when you're alone. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever replayed a conversation in your head and thought, "I should have said that. I know exactly what I meant. Why couldn't I explain it? Why did I freeze like that?" That's not a character flaw. That's a stress response. And manipulative questions are designed to trigger exactly that response. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. They don't attack you directly. They place you in a position where you feel like you need to prove something. And the moment you start proving, justifying, or defending yourself, the balance of power shifts. The other person becomes the one who evaluates. You become the one who performs. Let me ask you something honestly. When you feel calm, do you think clearly? When you feel safe, do your words flow more easily? And when you feel pressured or accused, do you notice how fast your confidence drops? That drop isn't random. It's your nervous system trying to protect you. And if you grew up learning that keeping the peace was important, that being agreeable kept you safe, that explaining yourself was the way to avoid conflict, your brain may have learned a pattern. Explain more. Soften your words. Take responsibility, even when it isn't yours. This pattern doesn't come from weakness. It comes from adaptation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Once someone learns they can control your emotional state by how they question you, they often keep doing it. And that's why recognizing manipulative questions isn't about becoming suspicious or defensive. It's about self-protection. And once you see it, you won't unsee it. Before we go into the types, I want to give you a simple way to tell the difference between a healthy question and a manipulative one. A healthy question is trying to learn. A manipulative question is trying to position you. Here are 3 quick signs. First, you feel like you're being evaluated, not understood. Second, you feel rushed, like you're not allowed to pause. Third, the question contains a hidden conclusion about who you are. And if you notice those signs, you don't need to answer faster. You need to slow the moment down, because your power is not in the perfect answer. Your power is in refusing the trap. One of the most common forms of manipulation doesn't sound manipulative at all. It sounds like a normal question. But if you listen carefully, you'll notice something important. The answer is already inside the question. A healthy question opens space. It invites reflection. It allows more than one possible answer. A manipulative question does the opposite. It narrows the space. It pushes you in one direction. It carries a hidden judgment. For example, there's a big difference between, "How do you feel about this?" and, "Don't you think you're being selfish right now?" In the second question, there's no real curiosity. There's an accusation. And the moment you hear it, something shifts. You're no longer sharing your experience. You're defending your character. Have you noticed that? Instead of talking about what you feel, you start explaining why you're not a bad person. Instead of staying connected to yourself, you start trying to correct the image the other person has of you. And that's exactly how this kind of question works. It places you in a moral position where silence feels dangerous and speaking feels like a trial. Your nervous system reacts fast. Your body senses accusation. Your stress response activates. Your thinking becomes narrower. That's why these questions often leave you feeling rushed, emotional, or off balance. Let me ask you something. Have you ever answered one of these questions and immediately felt the need to say more and more and more? Have you ever noticed yourself listing reasons, examples, justifications, even when you didn't know any? That urge doesn't come from clarity. It comes from pressure. And pressure doesn't create honest communication. It creates compliance. When someone asks you a question that already defines you as wrong, unfair, or selfish, they are not asking to understand you. They are asking you to submit to their version of reality. And the moment you accept that framing, you lose something important. You lose your ability to speak from truth. Because now you're speaking from defense. Let me give you a few examples so you can recognize this in real life. In a relationship, it sounds like, "So you're choosing your friends over me?" In family dynamics, it sounds like, "After everything we've done for you, you really think you can say no?" At work, it sounds like, "Do you always take things so personally?" Notice what all of these have in common. They're not asking what you think. They're telling you what you are: selfish, ungrateful, overly sensitive, and then forcing you to respond inside that label. And the moment you start defending the label, you lose track of the real topic. Here's something crucial to understand. You are not obligated to answer questions that accuse you. You are not required to justify yourself inside a narrative you didn't choose. And yet, many women do. Not because they want to, but because they were taught that being questioned means being accountable. But accountability requires respect. Manipulation does not. And this is where many women start doubting their own perception. There's a moment in certain conversations that feels especially disorienting. It's when you finally speak up. You name something concrete, a boundary that was crossed, a comment that hurt, a behavior that didn't feel right. And instead of addressing what you said, the other person responds with a question like, "So now I'm the bad one? Oh, so you're perfect and I'm the problem? So I'm the villain in your story, right?" At that moment, something subtle happens. The focus shifts. You were talking about a behavior. Now you're defending your character. This is one of the most corrosive communication patterns because it doesn't just silence you, it reverses reality. Suddenly, the original issue disappears. The crossed boundary fades into the background, and the emotional spotlight turns onto you. Have you ever noticed how fast that happens? 1 minute you're calm and clear. The next minute you're explaining that you didn't mean to accuse, that you're not attacking, that you're not trying to hurt anyone. And before you realize it, you're comforting the very person who dismissed your concern. Let me ask you something important. Have you ever walked away from a conversation like this feeling confused about how the roles flipped so quickly? That confusion is not accidental. When blame is inverted, your nervous system struggles to stay anchored in facts. Guilt and shame start to rise. And shame is especially powerful because it targets your sense of worth, not just your actions. When shame enters the conversation, clear thinking drops. You stop asking, "What actually happened?" and start asking, "What's wrong with me?" This is why this pattern is so effective. It doesn't argue with your point. It destabilizes you. And many women respond by softening their voice, minimizing their needs, or backing down entirely, not because they were wrong, but because they don't want to be seen as cruel or unfair. Here's something you need to hear clearly. Pointing out a problem does not make you a bad person. Naming a boundary does not make you aggressive. And asking for respect does not make you heartless. But when someone turns your boundary into an attack on your character, they are no longer engaging in dialogue. They are protecting themselves by shifting emotional weight onto you. And the longer this pattern continues, the more you start questioning your own perception. And once you recognize it, you'll understand why it feels so hard to say no. There is a type of question that feels especially suffocating. Because on the surface, it looks like a choice. But the moment you hear it, your body feels trapped. It sounds like this. So what is it? Do you trust me or not? Either you do this, or you clearly don't care about me. So are you with me or are you against me? At first glance, it sounds reasonable, almost logical. But something inside you tightens. That's because this kind of question doesn't offer a real choice. It removes complexity. It erases nuance. And it forces you into a decision under pressure. Have you ever noticed how fast your body reacts when someone asks you something like this? Your heart speeds up. Your mind rushes. You feel an urge to answer immediately just to make the tension stop. That reaction isn't emotional immaturity. It's a survival response. When the brain feels cornered, it searches for the fastest way out. And the fastest way out is often agreement. This is why these questions are so powerful. They don't ask you what you believe. They push you to choose the option that restores emotional peace in the moment, even if it costs you later. Let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you said yes just to end a conversation? How many times have you agreed with something you didn't fully believe because the alternative felt too uncomfortable? How many times have you chosen connection over self-respect without realizing that's what you were doing? These questions work because they activate urgency, and urgency shuts down reflection. When you're given only two options, both emotionally charged, your nervous system doesn't pause to evaluate fairness. It reacts. And once again, the balance of power shifts. The person asking the question controls the frame. You're left managing the emotional consequences. Here's the truth most people don't say out loud. If someone truly wants understanding, they don't force you into extremes. They don't threaten connection to get compliance. They don't frame disagreement as betrayal. When a question makes you feel like love, trust, or belonging will be taken away if you answer wrong, that's not communication. That's pressure. And pressure creates short-term agreement, but long-term resentment, self-doubt, and emotional fatigue. And if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling foggy, exhausted, or strangely exposed, this will explain why. There is another type of manipulative question that doesn't feel aggressive at first. It feels overwhelming. It comes wrapped in a lot of words, a lot of emotion, a lot of explanations. It sounds less like a question and more like a flood. Why would you say that? And what did you really mean and why now? And don't you see how this affects me? And why can't you just explain yourself better? By the time the person finishes speaking, you're already tired. Your mind tries to track everything at once. Your body feels tense. And instead of responding calmly, you feel the urge to answer everything. Have you ever noticed that? You don't even know where to start, but you start anyway. You explain one point, then another, then another. And the more you explain, the more exposed you feel. This kind of question doesn't seek clarity. It creates mental fog. When too much information is thrown at your brain at once, your working memory becomes overloaded. Your nervous system shifts into a reactive state. And clear thinking becomes difficult. That's when over-explaining shows up. Not because you're insecure. Not because you lack confidence. But because your brain is trying to regain control. If I explain it clearly enough, they'll understand. If they understand, the tension will stop. If the tension stops, I'll feel safe again. This is a learned response. For many women, especially those who grew up needing to stay emotionally attuned to others, explaining became a way to protect connection. But here's the painful truth. Manipulation doesn't disappear with more information. It feeds on it. Every extra detail you offer becomes material that can be questioned, twisted, or used against you later. And instead of resolution, you leave the conversation feeling drained, misunderstood, and strangely empty. Let me ask you something important. Have you ever explained yourself for a long time and still felt like nothing was resolved? Have you ever shared personal thoughts or emotions, only to regret how much you revealed later? Have you ever felt like the conversation took something from you? That's because you weren't in a dialogue. You were in a psychological drain. And the most dangerous part is that it doesn't look dramatic. There's no yelling, no obvious attack, just slow erosion. This is where many women start believing the problem is their communication skills, when in reality, the environment was never safe to begin with. If you tend to over-explain, I want you to remember this. You don't have to finish the conversation in the same emotional state it started. You're allowed to pause mid-sentence. You're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to say, I want to answer you, but not in this pressure. Because when you answer while flooded, you don't speak from your values. You speak from survival. And survival will always choose the fastest relief, not the deepest truth. There is something your body understands long before your mind finds the words. Your body doesn't analyze. It doesn't justify. It doesn't try to be polite. It simply reacts. That's why in certain conversations, your body shifts instantly, even when nothing obvious has happened yet. Your shoulders tense. Your chest tightens. Your throat feels constricted. Your breathing becomes shallow. And you don't know why. You just know something feels off. This is not intuition in a mystical sense. It's physiology. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for threat and safety. And when a question carries judgment, pressure, or hidden demand, your body registers it immediately. Before your mind can say, this feels manipulative, your body says, this doesn't feel safe. Have you ever felt your confidence drop the moment someone asked you a question? Have you ever felt smaller, even though you hadn't said anything yet? Have you ever felt like any answer you gave would somehow be wrong? Those are signals. They are signs that your system is shifting into protection mode. In that state, your body releases stress hormones. Your heart rate changes. Your ability to access calm, flexible thinking decreases. And this is why so many women leave conversations blaming themselves. You don't think, that question was unfair. You think, why can't I handle this better? But the problem was never your ability. It was the environment. Healthy questions create openness. They invite curiosity. They allow you to breathe. Manipulative questions do the opposite. They create contraction. They make you feel evaluated, not understood. Let me ask you something gently. When someone asks you a question, do you feel free to pause? Do you feel free to think? Do you feel free to say, I need a moment? If the answer is no, that's information. Your body is telling you that the interaction is not balanced. And here's something important to remember. Feeling uneasy doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're aware. Awareness is the first step toward protection. Not arguing, not explaining, not defending, but something much simpler and much calmer. And once you understand it, your responses will change naturally. When someone asks you a manipulative question, your instinct is almost automatic. You explain. You justify. You defend. And that reaction makes sense. You want to be understood. You want to clear the misunderstanding. You want to restore balance. But here's the part most people never realize. Defending yourself often strengthens the manipulation. Not because you're wrong, but because defense accepts the frame of the question. When you defend, you silently agree to one thing. That you're the one who needs to prove something. And the moment that happens, the dynamic shifts. The other person doesn't need to clarify their intention. They don't need to take responsibility for how they asked. They don't need to reflect. They get to stay in the position of evaluator. And you stay in the position of performer. Have you ever noticed how defending yourself rarely leads to relief? You explain one point, then they question another detail, then another, and somehow the conversation keeps going, but nothing feels resolved. That's because the goal was never clarity. The goal was control over the emotional direction of the exchange. Defending yourself feeds that goal, because every explanation gives the other person more material, more angles to question, more opportunities to redirect the focus. Let me ask you something important. Have you ever finished explaining yourself and still felt misunderstood? Have you ever thought, no matter what I say, it's never enough? Have you ever felt like the conversation keeps moving but you're losing ground? That's not a failure of communication. It's a signal that the structure of the interaction is unhealthy. Here's the shift that changes everything. You don't need to prove your innocence. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to answer every question that's asked. Instead of defending yourself, the most powerful move is to slow the interaction down and return responsibility. That means shifting the focus away from your reaction and back to the question itself. You're no longer answering inside the pressure. You're examining the pressure. And that small shift restores balance. Simple responses. Calm language. No escalation. Just clarity. And once you practice this, you'll notice something powerful. The questions lose their grip. Here's the shift that changes everything. Now I want to make this practical because awareness is not enough. You need language you can actually use in the moment. So here are 3 levels of responses. Short responses, when you don't want to open a debate. That's not a fair question. I'm not answering that framing. Ask it in a clearer way. Medium responses, when you want to stay connected but protected. I'll answer, but first tell me what you're really trying to understand. Are you asking for information, or are you asking to make a point? What would a respectful version of this question sound like? Firm responses, when the pattern repeats. I'm not continuing this conversation if the questions are loaded. If you want something, ask directly. I'm not responding to accusations. And the key is this: you don't need the perfect sentence. You need a consistent boundary. You don't break manipulative questions by arguing with them. You don't break them by explaining better. You break them by changing where you stand in the conversation. Instead of stepping into the pressure, you step back and ask for clarity. And clarity is powerful. Not loud, not aggressive, just steady. Here are responses that quietly return balance without escalation. What do you mean by that question? What exactly are you hoping I'll answer here? Can you ask that without implying blame? What is the purpose of asking me this right now? These responses do something important. They slow the interaction. They shift responsibility back to the person asking. They interrupt the emotional momentum. And notice something subtle. You're not refusing communication. You're requesting clean communication. If someone truly wants understanding, they'll clarify. If they want control, they'll become uncomfortable. That discomfort is not your responsibility. For questions that force extremes, you can say, I don't accept those as the only 2 options. There's more nuance than that. I'm not choosing between 2 versions that don't reflect how I feel. You're not rejecting the relationship. You're rejecting the trap. And when questions come in waves, emotional, confusing, overwhelming, it's okay to say, I'm not answering multiple accusations at once. Ask one clear question. We can continue this later when it's calmer. Ending a conversation is not failure. It's self-regulation. And sometimes, the healthiest response is the simplest one. I don't agree with that framing. That's not accurate. I see it differently. And then you stop. No explanation. No defense. No oversharing. Because silence, when chosen consciously, is not avoidance. It's containment. Now here's the deeper truth I want you to take with you. If manipulative questions have affected you for a long time, your nervous system may have learned a pattern. Explain. Appease. Comply. That pattern once kept you safe. But today, you're learning a new one. Pause. Clarify. Choose. And every time you choose clarity over self-betrayal, your system learns something new. Your stress response softens. Your confidence stabilizes. Your sense of self becomes less fragile. Not because people stop testing you, but because their questions no longer control your inner state. And if, as you're listening to this, you feel like you want to go deeper into that process, if you want practical tools to help you regulate your emotions, build inner stability, and develop emotional self-mastery at your own pace, I've created a guide specifically for that. It's a grounded, practical resource designed to help you understand your emotional patterns, stop reacting automatically, and build a sense of inner safety that doesn't depend on being seen or validated. You'll find that guide in the first pinned comment below. And let me leave you with this final question. What would change in your life if you stopped answering questions that were designed to make you feel small? If this video brought clarity, subscribe to Emotional Growth for more conversations like this. And if you want, share this with another woman who needs to hear it. Quietly, gently, without pressure. You are not here to be interrogated. You are here to be understood, or to walk away with your peace intact. I'll see you in the next episode.